let me tell you, I will use your opportunity here to be grateful to Nigerians. There are many of them desperately wanting to catch on and do something. It's not been easy for them either, which is why government simply has to do what the Americans did. There was a man called Mr. Hamilton, who was at the age of 36, the youngest minister of commerce the U.S. ever had, right? He worked under Abraham Lincoln. He talked about infant industry. Infant industry. Hand work your infant. When a baby is learning to walk, a toddler, you hold the hand and they learn until they stabilize. Government in Africa has a duty to hand work its citizens into industry. There is no alternative. We just have to, in every sector. If I was in charge at certain levels, believe me, the Treasury will give loans at 2%, because what they think is a loss is not a loss. Young people are looking for jobs. We are importing too much. People are unhappy. Life is tough for them. They are losing hope. Even if you give the loan at 1%, if it is not lost and is well managed, the byproducts, the return to the Treasury is huge. There will be pay as you earn by the workers, right? There will be import substitution. There will be exports, strengthening your foreign reserve, right? And the jobs you create reduce crime. So it makes sense to us. That's exactly what the Ministry of Agric is doing. We're not doing enough, but we're going to move further.
You talk about job creation. During your speech earlier, you made reference and actually advocated for the creation of a peer review mechanism. Can you give us more insights into
Because
this?
when we spoke, some of the African countries were like, well, you know, you had some delegates, well, we talk and talk. And I said, no, in Nigeria, we're not talking and talking. We're talking and walking, right? Because it isn't enough to come to seminars like this and say, this is what we should do. I was talking about what we are already doing and what we intend to do. I even mentioned a program called LIFE. Procure small-scale machinery and move to the rural areas. Create activities and wealth in the villages. Let those women, widows and so on, many of whom go to bed at night crying, their children are crying for food because there's nothing to eat. They are not stupid. If you have a small processing mill in the village where these women are doing their palm oil or groundnut oil or gari or whatever, and they go there each day, make some money and come back home. Women are very good managers of money when it comes to looking after families. You will never see a Nigerian woman in a beer parlor uploading a bottle of Gulda. The husband will.
Okay,
so
you have me chuckling on that one, sir.
Yes, yes.
So when you talk about peer review mechanism, you're actually in effect talking about using the indigenes and the citizens to monitor one another.
And then African countries should come round visiting each other. Like I said to them, you want to come to Nigeria tomorrow morning, I'll show you the rice mills. By the end of this year, there will be 21 giant mills in Nigeria. We're still bringing another 10 in. We bring in most of them and sell to people at a discount to encourage them.
You also advocated that African governments should embark on policy reforms to facilitate what you called large-scale adoption of food production systems. Can you shed more light on that?
Well, that has to do with research in seed and seedlings, institutes and institutions designated to do certain research in certain fields. Then, of course, adoption of technologies to suit our purposes. Most of these technologies today, most of them, we should look to India and to some extent China and Vietnam. You heard us talking about cashew nuts. The biggest producers of cashews in the world are African nations. Cote d'Ivoire, Ghana, Nigeria, we're number 4 on the list. Mozambique and Tanzania, and Guinea-Bissau. 90% of the cashew nuts are taken to India and Vietnam, roasted there. I was there in September, then exported to Europe. Now, in the processing, they extract something called cashew nut shell liquid from the shell. They take out the nut, prepare it, and ship to Europe. This year, Nigeria earned $700 million from raw cashew. If we had processed it here, we would have made $1.5 billion.
What's holding us back?
Machines. Which is why this year, the Ministry of Agric is bringing in 3 sets of 20-ton per day cashew processing machines.
Who was sitting on our machines before now?
We don't have the technology yet. There's a young man who makes some machines. He doesn't make the whole range. So he will make some. What we don't make, we bring in. And we're asking private sector people to come along, buy them and install them. They owe government. They pay back over a period because they're earning dollars. They pay back in dollars. And from those dollars they pay back, we repay the loan we took.
Are you seeing interest in that area?
Pardon?
Are you seeing interest?
Oh, yes. You'll be amazed how many people are waiting. The same as the rice mills we're bringing in. 10 new ones of 100 tons a day each. So they're all booked.
And the source of the financing still comes from the ministry?
From government, yes. Some from loans we've taken from the World Bank, some from our budget, some from our intervention funds.
So you are in effect able to take loan and ensure that the private investors access financing and they pay back to you at lower interest. Is that how it works?
Exactly. Because these are cheaper loans, 2-3%, for a long period of 15 years. Rather than use them for just training and seminars and workshops and consultants, I'm saying no. If you take a loan, whether you're a government or an individual, you've got to ask yourself, how and when do I pay back? Some of the loans that we took before I got there were mainly for training and, what do they call it, extension services and, procurement and seminars and workshops. Nothing wrong with those. But if you take a loan of $100 million, you've got to invest in something that will bring back the 100 million within the space of time you're owing the loan and pay back. That's my logic. If you're an honest man or woman and you're borrowing, ask yourself, how and when do I pay? Because by the time some of these loans are due, oil and gas may no longer play the role it is playing now. And I'm looking at a future. Should Nigeria reach a stage where it is loaded with debts and is unable to pay, our creditors won't forgive us a second time. They did so under Obasanjo. So we've got to say to ourselves, any loan we take now must arrange how do we pay back. Otherwise, we have no business signing for loans and leaving huge burdens for younger people coming behind.